Hi all, let's look at another interesting game encounter in Blitz chess this time. This was in the Altibox Norway Blitz tournament in round 3. I believe the time limit was 3 minutes each and 2-second increments for this. Magnus Carlsen playing against Wesley. So, knight f3. So the Reti opening to start off with, but it transposes into more standard territory now after c4, c6. Knight c3. Okay, there's some pressure on b7. Black parries that with queen b6, not minding at all about double pawns, of course. Knight e5. When I say of course, black's rook would be activated. I don't think there's such a big deal here. So knight e5, bishop h5, getting out of the way of knight takes g4, trying to keep that bishop on this diagonal outside of the pawn chain, so it does seem quite useful potentially. Bishop f4, knight bd7. Now white, I find this a little bit instructive, how to play the position with white. White's basic plan seems to be to try and put pressure on the queenside and undermine black's pawn chain, and to do this, this bishop would have to be extended in scope, and the first step is played out here. White takes on d7, which takes the knight away from e4 now for a moment, and then white pounces with e4, trying to hit this pawn chain hard and liberate this bishop, trying to get this bishop eyeing the queenside more, trying to break down the pawn chain up until b7 over there. D takes, knight takes, rook fd8, rook fe1, knight f6. So it's a positional game so far. And now another very interesting decision. Guess what Magnus Carlsen plays here, which kind of helps extend the pressure now against black's queenside. What would you play here? Okay, knight c5. Yeah, so knight takes b7 is now threatened, and the bishop is nicely looking at b8, so there's no easier way of protecting b7. Black took on b3, and now with not wanting to take on d4 because b7 undermines c6, it's uprooting the whole pawn chain from its roots. So the knight snapped off actually, which of course protects white's pawn now, and white here with the bishops looking very, very nice and coordinated, given time would play b4, b5 to try and put even more pressure on black's pawn chain. Black tries to batten down the hatches with a6, b4, rook ac8, designed against b5 to hit c5. So white now plays a cautious bishop e5, bishop g6, and it looks as though here the d file is pretty sensitive potentially. White plays to parry the d file, but also immediately, more than that, to try and lure the rook away from c8 and then play b5 without c5 dropping would be very desirable indeed. We have now bishop d3 preventing that for a moment and trying to snap one of white's pawns off. It provokes b3, and this seems to run into what seems to be annoying, bishop c2. But white's initiative is still here in this position. White took on d8, and even with b3 dropping, b5 is still effectual here and is played. Bishop takes b3, b takes a6, and you can see this bishop hammering now black's pawn chain and taking on c6 now. Bishop takes c4, but white has made a pawn investment here. He's a pawn down, but it's a very, very dangerous fast pawn, this c5 pawn. Bishop b7, bishop d5, c6, so there's an immediate c7 threat. That's parried in advance with rook f8. So now c7, bishop takes b7. We have bishop takes f6, and white gets his pawn back, king g7, and now brings the king in with f4. The king is going to travel across the dark squares. So f5, the king starts to travel across, and yeah, it's more comfortable for white here, this position. After king d6, this does seem fairly provocative, running into c7, but if white gets in king c5, that'll be it. The king starts helping the pawn with c7 push. So black has to do this. c7 check, king takes, and white's idea is to try and get a winning ending here. if e takes, the king can start scooping up the pawns off to king e5. And so we have rook d8, rook a5, king b6, rook c5, and here at this critical moment it does seem as though black is on the verge of losing this endgame. He has to play extremely accurately. There does seem to be a move available for black which might apparently keep equality, but black played a disastrous blunder here in, I imagine, extreme time pressure f6, which just loses immediately to check, and then taking on e6. There's no pin anymore. If we look at this, black did seem to have rook d6, and the king can't get into e5 because of c5 dropping. So how does white actually make progress here? If h4, h5 as an example, king c4, believe it or not, e takes d5, rook takes. There's a key move here in the form of rook f6. And I know this seems as though black's quite diced up here, but after king d4, king c6, it's difficult for white to try and break in. As an example, rook a5, king d6, check. This position, black can hold this. There's no zugzwang going on here. Black can hold this. So it does seem at a key moment in this blitz game, rook d6 does seem to hold the balance. So that was an unfortunate blunder. And in fact, this was the only game in the whole blitz event that Wesley so lost. So yeah, he didn't even need to lose this game. So he played a remarkable blitz tournament, and we'll have a look at some of his wins actually after this. I just thought I'd touch on some of these games because, you know, they have some general interest points for me, pointers for plans and stuff, and I hope you find them interesting as well. I thought it was quite instructive how we had a lot of pressure here on black's queenside, and that knight c5, the pawn sack, white was getting his pawn back with a strong initiative, but it just didn't seem enough to convincingly win with best play. But in practice, yeah, black did snap, perhaps in severe time pressure. Hope you got something from it. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.